For 3 decades, Johnny Carson didn't just host a talk show. He orchestrated a nightly ritual that 60 million Americans trusted more than their own families. Every evening at 11:30, they turned off their worries and turned on a man who made everything seem effortless. His smile was a promise that the world still made sense, that laughter could fix anything, that tomorrow would be just fine. But what if I told you that smile was a carefully constructed lie? What if the most trusted man in America was hiding something so disturbing that even now, decades after his death, the truth makes people uncomfortable? This isn't about nostalgia. This isn't another puff piece celebrating the king of late night. This is about what happened when the cameras weren't supposed to be watching, when the laughter died in the middle of a taping, when friendship exploded into betrayals so vicious they destroyed lives. Because Johnny Carson wasn't just running a television show. He was running an empire built on absolute control. And the price of that control was higher than anyone imagined. There's an episode that doesn't exist anymore. Not in NBC's archives. Not in any private collection. Nowhere. The network didn't just decide not to rerun it. They actively destroyed it, burned the reels, erased every trace like it was evidence of a crime. The crew who were there that night won't talk about it even now. They signed agreements, made promises, buried the memory so deep that even asking about it makes them nervous. What could possibly have been so catastrophic that one of the most powerful networks in television history wanted it erased from existence? The evening started like any other. The band played, the audience settled into their seats, and Johnny walked through that curtain with the same confident stride he'd perfected over thousands of shows. But something went wrong almost immediately. Some people who were there, claim a guest, began unraveling psychologically right. On stage, saying things that couldn't be unsaid, revealing truths that shattered the illusion of controlled entertainment. Others insist the chaos came from backstage, that violence erupted and spilled into the studio, that you could hear shouting and crashing while Johnny stood frozen at his desk, unable to regain command of his own show. A few whispered that Carson himself broke, that the pressure of maintaining perfection for so many years finally cracked him in front of everyone. When the broadcast ended, NBC executives didn't wait until morning. They called an emergency meeting while the audience was still filing out of the studio. By dawn, the decision was made. The footage would be locked away and then destroyed. Staff members were instructed to forget what they'd witnessed. The official network records show nothing for that date, as if the show simply didn't air, as if that night never existed. When television historians tried to investigate years later, they found doors slammed in their faces, people who refused to even acknowledge the question. One former producer would only say that Johnny was different afterward, that something fundamental had changed in him, that he laughed less when the cameras weren't running, and seemed haunted by a memory he could never discuss. But that lost episode wasn't the only secret Johnny Carson kept. His relationships were landmines waiting to explode, and when they did, the destruction was absolute. Joan Rivers wasn't just a comedian he'd helped. She was the person he'd told on national television would become a star, the one he trusted completely, almost like a daughter. For over 20 years, she was his perfect guest, fearless and fast and funny, in ways that made him genuinely laugh. He'd discovered her when nobody else believed in her talent, gave her the platform that launched her career, and in return she gave him loyalty that seemed unbreakable, until the day she accepted her own late-night show without telling him. First, the betrayal wasn't really about business. Fox offering Joan her own show was historic, the first time a woman would host in that format, and she was terrified the deal would fall apart if word leaked too early. She planned to tell Johnny once everything was finalized, once she could present it as a done deal and explain how much his mentorship had made it possible. But the media found out before she could make that call. When she finally reached him to explain, to tell him how grateful she was and how much he still meant to her, he hung up the phone. No conversation, no chance to apologize or clarify, just silence. That same night he issued an order to NBC. Joan Rivers was banned from The Tonight Show permanently. She would never be invited back as long as he was alive. What happened next wasn't just professional failure. Joan's show struggled, and her husband Edgar, who'd produced it, couldn't handle the pressure and the guilt and the sense that they'd destroyed something irreplaceable. He took his own life. Joan lost her husband and her career and the man who'd once called her a star, all within months. She was drowning in grief, and Johnny Carson never reached out. Not a card, not a call, nothing. They never spoke again for the rest of his life. Years later, Joan would say that losing Johnny's friendship hurt worse than almost anything else she'd endured. That it felt like losing part of herself. That she'd trade almost anything for one more conversation where he forgave her. But Johnny's capacity for cutting people out of his life completely wasn't unique to Joan. Wayne Newton learned the same lesson in a far more dangerous way. For years, Carson used the singer as a punchline in his monologues, mocking his appearance, his style, making insinuations about his sexuality that might have seemed harmless to the audience, but were destroying Newton's reputation and career. Newton called Carson's office repeatedly, asking him to stop, explaining how the jokes were fueling rumors that were becoming impossible to fight. Every call went ignored. Finally, Newton had enough. He showed up at NBC studios unannounced and walked straight into Johnny's office while he was in a production meeting. He demanded everyone else leave, and when they were alone, Newton made himself very clear. If Carson ever made another joke about him, there would be physical consequences. People who knew Johnny said it was one of the only times they'd ever seen genuine fear in his eyes. The jokes stopped immediately, but so did any relationship between them. Newton never appeared on the show again, and Johnny never acknowledged what had happened. Years later, Newton would call Carson cruel and mean-spirited, someone who used his power to destroy people for entertainment, and then hid behind his reputation as America's nice guy. The confrontation became legendary in Hollywood, proof that even the king of late night could be intimidated when someone refused to play by his rules. And then there was Charles Grodin, who did something almost no other guest dared to do. He challenged Johnny on air, in front of millions of people, at a time when Carson's dominance seemed absolute. During what was supposed to be a routine interview, Grodin suddenly asked whether Johnny actually cared about his guests or just viewed them as props for his own performance. The question landed like a bomb. The audience went silent, Carson froze, and for a moment the entire illusion of the show cracked open. What followed wasn't comedy or banter. It was real tension, real defensiveness, Carson's voice becoming sharp and his face tightening in ways viewers almost never saw. When producers wanted to cut the segment from reruns, Johnny refused. He wanted people to see it, wanted them to know that beneath the perfect image was someone human and flawed and tired of pretending. Even the lighter moments on The Tonight Show carried an edge of chaos that revealed how fragile Johnny's control really was. The animal segments with Joan Embry were supposed to be fun, but one night a monkey attacked a guest and then a snake escaped its handler and slithered across the stage, while Johnny backed away in visible terror. His composure completely gone, the polished host reduced to genuine fear on live television. He refused to cut that segment either, knowing audiences loved seeing the moments when he lost control, when the perfection cracked, and something real emerged underneath. What made Johnny Carson compelling wasn't just his talent. It was the sense that beneath every perfect joke, every smooth interview, every effortless transition, there was something darker waiting to break through. He built an empire on making people feel safe and entertained. But the cost of that empire was relationships destroyed, episodes erased, and a version of himself that he could never fully escape. The man who made America laugh every night was also the man who cut people out of his life without mercy, who burned bridges without looking back, who controlled his image so completely that even now, we're still discovering what he kept hidden. And maybe that's the real story. Not the legend of Johnny Carson, but the truth of what it cost him and everyone around him to maintain that legend for 30 years.